Hi, I'm Sunny Hong, the director of the Global Diaspora Unit SIL that works with people who have moved from their homelands and find themselves needing to learn English. You've heard about English with Newcomers and would like to know if this program is a good option for your situation. Join us to learn more.
Hello, Sonny. Thanks for taking some time to talk about this. I read the English with Newcomers guide and I looked at the first few lesson plans and I have some questions.
Great! Reading the guide and looking at the lesson plans is a good way to evaluate whether this is a good fit.
Well, first, I'd just like to know more about who made these lessons and why.
I live in Switzerland and my mother tongue is German. I've been involved in language learning of some sort for many years, initially to help cross-cultural workers to learn how to learn the language of their host country. And I found the Greg Thompson's Growing Participator approach, GPA, particularly helpful for this situation. And as you know, in 2015, the war broke out in Syria, and hundreds of thousands of Syrians came into Western Europe. And if they were going to have any hope of integrating, they needed to learn the language of their host country. And so, to cut a long story short, together with a team, I developed these materials to help German speakers, native German speakers, to know how to work with the Syrians to learn another language. And these materials were then later developed into English.
Okay, that's helpful. Now I'm curious about something else. How long did it take you to learn English?
I learned a little bit of English in high school, and just after high school, I spent 6 months in England, first as a student in a language school, and then in a family where I helped with the children and the household and just heard and used it all day long. Afterwards, over the years, I had more exposure to English in various contexts, and I ended up marrying an Englishman, and that was 33 years ago. But the decisive part in my English learning was the 6 months of immersion at the beginning.
And Sonny, what about you?
When I grew up in Korea, I learned English through grammar and reading books from the middle school through the first year of college. I struggled, and after 7 years of learning English, I could not even say greetings in English. I always thought that I didn't have a gift for learning languages. But maybe if I had learned through a relational method like English with Newcomers, I might have learned much more quickly.
Okay, I'm getting the picture that I would just be helping a newcomer get started in a very long process, which would involve lots of people and lots of different resources. That's reassuring that it doesn't all depend on me. So if I use these lessons, how have these lessons help me help somebody?
Well, the lessons are structured so that each game is built on the previous game, and they listen, they respond, and as they learn more and more English, they understand more and they learn to respond verbally, and you're guided with the lessons from one step to the next.
So no reading and writing?
That comes later. We want to get them comfortable understanding and speaking first before we introduce the reading and writing.
Encouraging people sounds better to me than having to correct papers. Do you have any examples of how somebody has been encouraged using this approach?
Let me introduce you to Karen Bradley. She is an experienced ESL teacher and has recently been using these lessons to teach English to newcomers.
Hi, I'd like to tell you about Rita, an older lady in our class who worked at Renew, the nonprofit where I volunteered. She had been in the US for nearly 8 years, but was still very hesitant to use the English she heard around her every day. She decided to come to our English class and give it a try. The other volunteers and I used a traditional textbook approach for teaching. We used fill-in-the-blank worksheets and some other activities that involved reading and writing. The environment was much too school-like for Rita, and she felt very uncomfortable and stressed. The other volunteers and I came across English with Newcomers and decided to give it a try. The very first time we did a quick dozen, Rita seemed extremely surprised. There was not a book, not a whiteboard, not a pencil. There were simply pictures and games and speaking activities that she caught on to immediately. This was such a welcome relief to Rita, and she finally began using and growing in the English she had been hearing for nearly 8 years.
So this program doesn't just work for newcomers. It helps anybody who hasn't succeeded in learning English yet.
That's right. Each person's situation is very different.
You're an English teacher. I'm not a teacher, and I don't remember much about grammar. How much training would I need to be able to use these materials?
Actually, I think being an English teacher made it a little more challenging for me at the beginning because this approach used in the English with Newcomers manual was so very different from any other way I had taught. But the instructions were very easy, and a friend of mine, Pam Eckert, was very happy to assist me as I learned how to use this approach.
But what if I have questions?
Let me introduce you to Pam Eckert. She has been the SIL consultant on this project and answered so many of my questions as I was getting started learning how to use this, and she would be very happy to help you along as well.
Hi, Pam. I have more questions right now, and I'm sure I'll have more after I get started.
Let's start with the questions you have now, and then I'll tell you how to get more questions answered later.
I have a neighbor who has been here for several years. She always gets one of her children to translate for her. Maybe my wife could help her. Does English with newcomers only work in a classroom setting?
These lessons work very well in a home setting and allow small children to be in the same room while their parents are learning.
Oh, that would be really helpful.
And you could get the older children to see how you play the games, and then they could review with their mom between lessons.
But they still have an accent. Don't they have to be taught by native speakers?
People can be helped to learn by anybody who knows more than they do. Remember, the focus of the activities is on understanding and being understood. And of course, she wants to be able to understand her children when they speak English. The more confident she becomes with understanding and being understood, the more she will be able to interact with native speakers.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. That really helps. You mentioned the quick dozen. I read the instructions for a quick dozen, but is there any way I could see someone doing one?
Yes, Greg and Angela Thompson have created 43 free videos on a Vimeo website demonstrating the different types of games they use in their free plans for growing participation in any language. The video where Greg explains how the quick dozen works and Angela demonstrates the process with 2 English learners should help you. Follow the links on our website.
So how are their free materials different from yours?
The Thompson's materials are for language learners to adapt and use for learning any language, even a language that does not have a written form. English with Newcomers is for English speakers who want to help newcomers feel at home in their new community. It is inspired by the Thompsons and uses the same types of games, but is more focused on the immediate needs of the newcomers.
I think I'll just stick with English. My church has been talking about starting an English class on Wednesday nights. We have children's activities that night, so parents won't need a babysitter. But I read that you recommend meeting at least 3 times a week.
Yes, it's really hard to make progress when meeting only once a week. For the brain to strengthen the neural connections for a new language, it takes lots and lots of opportunities to hear and understand the words in lots of different sentences. Catherine talks about scheduling different volunteers on 3 different days in her guide, but another option is to invite neighbors or family members who know some English to attend the weekly lessons. They could observe how to do the different types of games and then try to follow the lesson plans to help the learner at home between sessions.
And you already said that it is okay to practice with people who don't speak perfectly?
Yes, they would be supplements to the native speaking nurturers at your church. Getting familiar with more than one accent is all a part of growing participation.
You use that word nurturer. I understand why you don't want to use teacher. You say that in lots of cultures, teachers focus on reading and writing and memorization and doing perfect work. And your approach is about helping people understand and be understood without needing to be perfect. But do I really have to call myself a nurturer? Could sound a little weird.
You don't ever have to use that word, but do try to avoid saying you're teaching English. You're helping people learn and grow in participation in their new neighborhood using English. We use the word nurturer in our lesson plans to remind you that your role is as an encourager of growth. If you want to understand more about why Thompson chose that word, follow the link on our website.
That's a relief that it's just a reminder and I don't have to call people nurturers. And I can see that there's not much point in starting a program that only meets once a week if people can't really learn that way. But what if the family members do it wrong?
Wrong? Do you mean if they make the learner feel ashamed or unintelligent? It really is important that people who help the learner understand that they must make the activities enjoyable and stop when the learner needs to stop. Otherwise, creatively adapting the instructions in order to accommodate the learner's wants and needs is not doing it wrong, it's doing it differently. It takes a long time and lots of help to adjust to a new world.
I'm sure I'm going to have a lot more questions. I saw that I can follow links to get answers. What if I still have questions?
Our website has a frequently asked questions page, which we're adding to as needed. And my email address is on the website where you can ask me additional questions. There's also an English with Newcomers Facebook page where nurturers can learn from one another.
Okay, I think I'll give it a try. Thanks.
That's what I'm here for. I really hope you'll enjoy using this with the newcomers in your community.